I also have been looking at the data about the impact of the minimum wage. As I understand it, what most of the studies show now is if we raise the minimum wage to $10.10, then we would generate about 140,000 new jobs. Mr. Shelton referred to this. I think we're reading the same studies. That would get about $32 billion more in economic activity. I know that Senator Alexander cares about generating more jobs and more economic activity. And as Senator Casey said, we affect 23 million children, and in particular, lift 17 million children out of poverty if their parents earned a higher minimum wage, which of course in turn reduces reliance on food stamps, Medicaid, earned income tax credit, and other forms of support. So it seems to me the only argument we ever hear not to do this is this argument that if we raise the minimum wage, there will be fewer jobs available. And I appreciate reading your studies, Dr. Reich. Also, Dr. Dubé from the University of Massachusetts Amherst was here before to talk to us about his studies. So I just want to think about this gold standard study. When you look at a metropolitan area that reaches across 2 states and the minimum wage goes up in one state, doesn't go up in the other, I would say that's probably the gold standard for testing whether or not there's going to be an impact on jobs from changing the minimum wage. So my question, Mr. Shirk, is are there any of those gold study standards that show that when that happens, that jobs have disappeared?
The question here, Senator, is what makes an appropriate control group, and that's at the heart of the dispute between Mr. Reich and his colleagues, and between Newmark and Washer and the research.
I'm sorry, Mr. Shirk. Is there a study of the kind I just described?
So there are studies that control for local effects, that have local controls, and compares. They're not the cross-border studies. There are other studies.
Excuse me, let me just make sure I have this right. There are cross-border studies, is that right?
There are studies that compare the effects of states that raise minimum wage to those that do not, and include regional controls.
All right, and what do those studies show consistently?
The vast majority of these studies show that raising the minimum wage reduces employment. Now, what you have is...
Dr. Reich, is that right? You've got to turn your...
Yeah, they don't use regional controls. I'm sorry, you have to read the studies. I mean, not to cite the results, but there's no... They argue against having these controls, as you said in your own in your prepared statement. So now, once you get into local controls, you don't find negative effects.
What they include is state-specific trends for the...
That's just comparing one state to a random other state. It's not a local control. That's the whole point.
That's
what's wrong.
That's right, about a particular form of study, and that is you look at one metropolitan region that cuts across the state border. Minimum wage is raised on one side, not on the other, so you've got a consistent metropolitan region. I think that sounds like the gold study in determining whether or not a change in minimum wage affects whether or not there will be jobs. And as I understand it, Dr. Dubé's study, Dr. Reich's study, other studies have a consistent outcome. And what is it that is, Dr. Reich?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Aaron Dubé was a student of mine, and these are co-authored studies. So,
fair enough.
But we've now done this with 5 different data sets: the American Community Survey, the census, the what else do we use? The quarterly workforce indicators, the quarterly census of employment and wages, and we've used 5 different statistical approaches to having local controls, and they all come out the same way.
And that is?
That there's no negative employment effect.
All right. So I just want to say my home state of Massachusetts has a higher minimum wage than the rest of the country. We're currently at $8, and we have a pending proposal in our state legislature to raise it to $11 an hour. I hope you will note that the Massachusetts economy is growing. Our unemployment rate is at 6.4%, more than a full point below the national average of 7.6%. I understand we need control studies. The control studies, it seems to me, reinforce the experience we have in Massachusetts. We have raised our minimum wage, we have stayed above the national minimum wage, and we have done better on employment. We have raised the boat. We have for all of our families, and it has worked for us. We have an opportunity here, it seems to me, Mr. Chairman, to generate jobs, to lift 17 million children out of poverty, to reduce the amount of money that we spend on Medicare, on Medicaid, on food stamps, on earned income tax credit. This is an opportunity for us. We need to raise the minimum wage.